Hi, my name's Paul Salazar, and I'm here to tell you about the Omnijig. I have used the Omnijig extensively in my shop and in both my advanced and basic router seminars, and have found it to be the finest and easiest piece of equipment to use to cut dovetails. I'd like to take some time now to show you the Omnijig in use and to give you a few tips and techniques to make the setup and operation of your Omnijig very quick and easy. Dovetail jigs are primarily used to cut dovetails for drawer construction. Machine-cut dovetails, those cut with a router and a template, are most often distinguished by set spacing and size of the dovetails themselves. The primary purpose of using dovetail construction for drawers is to add mechanical strength to the drawer joint so that it can withstand thousands of openings and closings. This would be the drawer front and this the drawer side here. And due to the dovetail construction, as I pull on the forward portion, the front portion of this drawer, there is great mechanical strength there even without glue, and the joint will not come apart.
Equipment needed to cut the half-inch, half-blind dovetails includes a router, preferably of 1.5 horsepower or better, the half-inch, half-blind dovetail template, a half-inch dovetail bit, the Allen wrench, and your 5/8 inch guide bushing. All of these items are provided with the Omnijig. Additional items that you'll find helpful in setup of the Omnijig include a fine lead mechanical pencil, a 9/16 inch wrench, an accurate ruler, a T-handled hex wrench, a square, a sharp knife or razor, a depth gauge, and a can of paste wax. One other item that I find very helpful when cutting dovetails is a simple block of wood with a large hole cut in it so that I can set my router down with the exposed router bit and not worry about it cutting into my workbench.
The Omnijig is easy to use and setup is simple. Let's begin with the half-inch, half-blind dovetail. When using the Omnijig for the first time, make sure that it is securely mounted to a workbench or a stand such as this, with the front edge of the Omnijig projecting beyond the edge of the table of the workbench so that your boards can be slid down in front and clamped into position without interference of your table. For the initial setup, loosen your adjustable stops and slide them out of the way. They will be adjusted later for the proper setup. Next, adjust the front clamp for the thickness of the material you'll be using. Place the material behind the clamp, put pressure in at the bolts, and tighten the nuts from behind until you have your clamp spaced evenly both on the left and right hand side. Check to make sure that the clamp holds the material securely by lowering the lever and putting pressure against your material with the cam. After the front clamp is adjusted, adjust the top clamp for the thickness of that material. Again, place your material under the clamp, press down at the bolts, and tighten the nuts from underneath. Do this both on the left and right hand side, and after this is done, again, check to make sure that pressure is being put on your board evenly with the cam. After your clamps are adjusted, take your side piece of your drawer, insert it behind the front clamp, approximately 1/4 inch above the surface, and lock in place. Next, take what would be your front of your drawer, place it under the top clamp, butt it firmly up against your side piece, and lock it into position. The finger template for your half-inch, half-blind dovetail joints comes in a separate box and is unassembled. Loosely attach the brackets with the screws provided and attach it to your Omnijig behind the knobs, making sure that it's level, and tighten these in position. Next, take an Allen wrench, tighten down the screws, and you will be assured of perfect alignment for your finger template. By the way, I am using a T-handled Allen wrench, which is not provided with the Omnijig, which I find a little more convenient to use than the standard Allen wrench. After we adjust the clamps and assemble the template, the next step is to adjust the template position on the jig. Loosen the knobs and remove the template from the Omnijig. As you notice, there are 3 black washers here. I have found through experience that general positioning of 2 washers behind and 1 in front of the bracket puts you in the general ballpark of positioning the template on the jig. Next, place your template back on the Omnijig. Hold the template flush to your top piece of material and tighten the left-hand knob. Next, loosen the bracket, move your material to the right-hand side of the fixture, tighten the bracket, again place some pressure on top of the template and tighten the right-hand knob. This will ensure that your template is parallel to the top surface of your Omnijig. In order to cut dovetails, we must make 3 more adjustments on the Omnijig. Generally, these measurements and adjustments can be done with a ruler. From the very front edge of your top board to the back portion of your finger template, we must measure and adjust the finger template to 19/32 of an inch. This must be done on both the left and right-hand side of the template. The second critical dimension is the dimension from the edge of the template to the edge of the board, and this must be 3/16 of an inch. And finally, the third critical dimension is the relationship of the front board to the top board. And the left edge of the front board must be 7/16 of an inch from the left edge of your top board. Now I'd like to show you a simple and accurate method of making these adjustments on your Omnijig. First of all, you'll need a piece of material to go under your front clamp. You need a pad of paper, a mechanical pencil with some fine lead, a depth gauge, and a square. Set your depth gauge for 19/32 of an inch. This is the distance from the back of your finger template to the front edge of your top board. In order to draw a very fine line, take your mechanical pencil and while rotating it, sharpen the point. Make a mark on both the left and right-hand side of your board. Next, take your square line it up with those marks and draw a very thin line all the way across your board. Next, readjust your depth gauge to 3/16 of an inch. This is the distance from the left and right side of your board that your finger template must be adjusted over. Place your depth gauge on your board and towards the front edge of the board, make a thin line. It's 3/16 inch from the edge on both the left and right-hand side of the board. Next, place your board in a vise. Readjust your depth gauge to 7/16 of an inch. This is the distance that your front board is going to be offset from your top board. Make a mark on both the left and the right-hand side of your board. Extend those marks with a square. We now have all 3 critical dimensions, both for the left and the right-hand side, on the board. The distance of 19/32, the distance of 3/16, and the distance of 7/16. Now that we have a marked setup board, let me show you the easy way to make accurate adjustments on the Omnijig. First, take your front board and bring it up underneath the bracket until it projects above the top surface of the Omnijig by about 1/4 of an inch, and lock it in position. Next, take your marked setup board and slide it under your top bracket and under the finger template all the way over to the left and butt it up against your front board and lock it in position. As you can see, our finger template is too far back in relationship to our setup line that is 19/32 of an inch from the front edge of our board. In order to make this minute adjustment in relationship of the finger template to the front edge of the board, we must use a 9/16 inch wrench on the rod nuts behind the bracket of the finger template and move the finger template, in this instance, forward until the back edge of that finger template is lined up with that line. Make the same adjustment on the right-hand side of the template. It does help to take the stops out temporarily as you're making this adjustment. It's much easier to get the wrench in. Next, move your materials back to the left-hand side. Raise the front board approximately 1/4 inch above the top surface. Lock it in position. Move your top board over and butt it against your front board. Slide it over until our setup line of 3/16 of an inch is right in line with this edge of the template. Lock the board in position. Slide the top left stop over until it hits your top board and lock it in position. Make the same adjustments for the right-hand side. Move your front board over until it projects slightly above the surface of the jig. Lock it in position. Next, move your setup board over. Again, positioning it so that the 3/16 inch mark is right even with the edge of your template. Lock it in position. Move your right top stop over until it butts against the board and tighten it down. Next, we must adjust the front board in relationship with the top board. Move your front board over until the right edge lines up perfectly with our 7/16 inch mark on our setup board. Lock the board in position, slide your stop over, and then tighten your stop. Next, we must make the same adjustment to the other side of the fixture. Move your front board over. Make sure it's projecting slightly above the top of the fixture. Lock it in position. Move your top board over until it butts against your left stop, which is fixed in position now, and butt against the front board. Lock it in position. Now reposition the front board so that the left edge of it lines up perfectly with our 7/16 inch setup mark. Lock the board in position. Slide the left front stop over until it butts against the board and lock the left stop in position. The Omnijig is now set up to make our first trial cut for a dovetail. Before we cut our dovetails for the first time, we must set up our router. First, we must put our 5/8 inch guide bushing on our router base. This is done simply by inserting the guide bushing inside of the router base and placing the lock ring on the back side and tightening it. Notice that the guide bushing projects slightly beyond the base of the router. The guide bushing will run along your template with the router bit projecting through the guide bushing. This way, the router bit will not cut your template. Take your 1/2 inch dovetail router bit and insert it in your router. Run it all the way down and back out slightly. And tighten your collet. Assemble your router. And adjust the depth of cut to 21/32 of an inch. Now with our Omnijig and our router set, we're ready to make our first dovetail cut. But first, let me give you a little tip. I have found that using a little bit of paste wax on the template itself and on the base of the router will make your cutting a lot smoother. In order to cut our dovetails, we first want to make a cut across the front of the board in what we call a climb cut, to cut a clean shoulder on your pin board. And then, moving the bushing in and out of the template, we will cut both pins and tails simultaneously. Make sure you place the router firmly and level on your finger template. Our first cut is going to be across the face of the pin board. Make sure that your router is totally off before you remove it from the template. Slide it out and set it down. Check and make sure that you have a clean cut all the way across. Notice that both your pins and tails were cut simultaneously. This was done with this 7/16 inch offset that we set up on the template. Now we want to check for fit. Remove the pieces of material from the Omnijig. And see how they fit. Getting the Omnijig fine-tuned for perfect dovetails requires some sample cuts. That's why I asked you to prepare plenty of scrap to the same dimensions as your finished drawers. There are three basic problems that you can have with the fit of your dovetails. Number one, your joints can be too loose or too tight. Number two, the joints can seat too deeply or not deep enough. And three, you can have a gap at one end of your dovetail or the other. First, a joint that is too loose will be very sloppy and have plenty of gap up here. In order to make a correction for this, you want to make a deeper cut. By 1/32 of an inch increments, make a trial cut until you get a good tight joint. A joint that is too tight, on the other hand, will not fit together properly or may have to be pounded together. In order to make a correction for this type of cut, you want to raise your bit, make a shallower cut, again in increments of 1/32 of an inch until you get a good tight fit. The second problem that we have is where our joints are too deep or too shallow. For instance, this is a joint that is far too deep. You can see how far the sides go in. In order to make an adjustment for this, you're going to have to move your finger template. You must bring the template forward in order to make a socket that is not quite so deep. And the opposite of that is a joint that is too shallow, where the pins fit in, but they won't go in far enough. And in this case, you must move your finger template back in order to make a deeper socket. And the third and final problem that we have is a joint where you end up with a gap at one end or the other of your dovetail. And this is caused by your front board or your pin board not being brought up flush to the underside of your finger template. The trial cut that we made with our Omnijig has two problems. First of all, the sockets are too shallow and the pins project beyond the edge of the board, and the joint is too loose. So we must move the finger template back from the front edge of the Omnijig in order to take care of the shallow cut, and we must also increase the depth of our cut with our router bit in order to take care of the loose fit. Using my original setup board with my 19/32 inch line on there, I'm going to place it back into the fixture to fine-tune the jig. Now remember, I've got to move this finger template back slightly in order to make my sockets a little deeper. I can view my line and move my rod nuts accordingly until my template goes back a little past that line this time. We'll do the same thing on the other side of the template. Finally, I must make a deeper cut, and I want to make a trial cut again by bringing the router bit out from the base at least 1/32 of an inch. I'll do this by making an adjustment with this fine line that you see etched on the router, and these marks that you see on this ring, 2 marks equals a 32nd of an inch. So I will screw the router motor in to the right until it moves over 2 marks, and that will actually lower my bit 1/32nd of an inch. Having removed our setup boards, again we're going to put some more scrap into the fixture and make another trial cut. Again, make sure your top piece butts up against the left stop and firmly against your front board. Bring your front board up against it, left front stop, and flush with the finger template. Take your router, we'll do our shoulder cut, and then cut our pins and tails. Again, check to make sure that you have a nice uniform cut. Check for fit. This time we have a perfect joint. Let's take a few minutes to talk about drawer construction. If you look at a well-executed hand-cut dovetail, you'll notice a certain symmetry about the joints. The joints start with a half pin at the top and bottom. This is very easy to do when you're cutting hand dovetails. With a machine-cut dovetail, it's not always easy to begin and end with a half pin. The machine-cut dovetail repeats itself every 7/8 of an inch. And in order to get a perfect half pin at the beginning and end of your drawer, you must build your drawers in dimensions of 7/8 inch increments. If you want all of your drawers to begin and end with a half pin, this means you must design your drawers ahead of time in 7/8 inch increments and design your carcass around your drawers. If, on the other hand, your drawers are in other than 7/8 inch increments, you may begin with a half pin, but may end with no pin whatsoever on this side. Structurally, there's nothing wrong with this joint. But for aesthetic reasons, you may want to begin your drawers with half pins on both ends. If you design your drawers so that they are in perfect 7/8 inch increments, you can cut all of your joints on either one side of your Omnijig or the other, and still end up with perfect half pins on both ends of your joint. This is very aesthetically pleasing. On the other hand, if you have material that is dimensioned in other than 7/8 inch increments, what you get is a half pin at the top here, no pin at the top here, no pin at the bottom here, and then a half pin at the bottom here. Structurally, this is very sound, but it's not as aesthetically pleasing. Additionally, looking at the top of the drawer, you can see we have what appears to be a butt joint on this corner and a dovetail joint on this corner. If you use both ends of the Omnijig to cut your joints, you will always end up with a symmetrical joint, even though you don't end up with a half pin top and bottom. All of your half pins will be at the top of your drawer. All of your no pins will be at the bottom of your drawer. One other thing we need to consider is where we cut the groove for our bottom piece in our drawers. The groove should be cut within the socket all the way around for our drawer bottoms. If you have cut all of your joints on one side of the Omnijig with non-standard dimensioned material, what happens is that you will end up with a through cut on 2 of your corners, which is not very pleasing. In order to eliminate these problems, it's my recommendation that no matter whether you're using material that is in perfect 7/8 inch dimensions or not in perfect dimensions, that you make cuts on both the left hand and the right hand side of the Omnijig. So next, I'd like to show you how to properly lay out a drawer for cutting on the Omnijig. Your drawers are constructed of 4 pieces of material, a front and back, generally 3/4 inch thickness, and two sides of 1/2 inch to 5/8 inch thickness. I always lay my drawers out in the same manner for marking. Front, back, left and right sides. Always check your material to make sure that your best face is down. What is exposed here will be the inside of the drawers. Next, you need to mark your drawers so you know how to put them in the Omnijig. Starting from your left side, I'll mark this piece side A, B, C, and D. I also want to make those marks close to what is going to be the bottom edge of my drawers. So I'll mark an A here, a B here, C, and D. Those will be the bottom edges of my drawers. Each piece of material is going to be cut on both the left and the right hand side of the Omnijig. Remember, we marked the bottom edge of each drawer, inside edge of the drawer. The bottom edge always goes against your stop, both on top and bottom. Place your pin piece in slightly above the top edge of your Omnijig, lock it in position. Take your front, again making sure that the bottom edge is going to be against the stop. Place it against the stop and flush up against the front piece. Lock it in position. Raise your front piece until it's flush with the underside of the finger template and against the left stop. And make your cut. Next, remove the top piece totally from the fixture. Remove your pin board from the front of the fixture. Rotate it in this manner. Reinsert it behind your clamp and move it to the right side of the Omnijig. Lock it in place. Next, take the back of your drawer, the piece that you did not cut, and place it under your top clamp, again with the bottom inside edge of the drawer butted against your right hand stop and flush up against your front piece of material. Readjust your front piece so that it is flush with the bottom edge of your template. Lock it in position. Remove the front piece. It has both cuts already made on it. Move your top piece over to the left-hand side of your fixture, again making sure that the bottom edge is against the stop. Take your second side piece, again making sure that your bottom edge is going to be against your left stop. Insert it under the front bar clamp. Flush against the side stop, lock it in position. Reposition your top piece, again making sure that the bottom edge is against the top left stop and butted firmly against your front piece. Lock it in position. Reposition your front piece, ensuring that it is flush with the bottom edge of your finger template and against your stop, and lock it in position. We're now ready to make our third cut. We'll now make our final cut on the pieces on the right-hand side of the fixture. Remove the back piece, which has both cuts made on it. Insert the front piece, again making sure your mark is against the stop, underneath the top bar. Rotate this front piece and place it against the right front bar, making sure that the bottom edge is against the stop. Lock it down, reposition your top piece flush against the right stop and your front piece of wood. Lock it in position, reposition your front piece against your right stop and flush underneath your template. Lock it in position. And we are now ready to make our fourth and final cut. What we've just completed is what is referred to as a flush drawer, where the entire drawer will slide into the carcass of the set of drawers. A helpful tip, once you have your stop set for cutting perfect dovetails with your Omnijig, is to scribe a line on your Omnijig to position your stops back to the same position once again, should you have to move them for other Omnijig templates. Repositioning your stops is fast and accurate now without having to use your setup block. The scribe lines that we just put on the base of the Omnijig are only for the half-inch, half-blind dovetails. I do this because it's that style of dovetail that I cut most often on the Omnijig. When I make changes in the position of the stops for some of the other templates that we're going to use, I can reset for my half-inch, half-blind dovetails very quickly and accurately. Next, I want to show you how to make a rabbeted drawer front. This drawer front is distinguished by a 3/8-inch rabbet all the way around the drawer front. The backs and sides of your rabbeted drawer are cut exactly the same as your flush drawer. The only difference is your rabbeted drawer front. You dimension your material 3/4 of an inch wider and 3/4 of an inch longer than your drawer opening. Additionally, you must cut a 3/8-inch rabbet all the way around the drawer front. I have marked what will be the bottom of my drawer with a B, as I do in my normal flush drawer. Placing the material under the top clamp, we must reposition our left and right stops to make up for the 3/8-inch rabbet that we have cut around here. We want this front edge to be 3/16 of an inch underneath the template here. Additionally, since the portion of the board that we want to cut our sockets in is now 3/8 of an inch farther back from the front edge of the Omnijig, we need to move our template back 3/8 of an inch. A simpler way to make this adjustment is to use a rabbeting spacer block. This is no more than a 3/4 inch piece of material with a 3/8 inch shoulder cut on one end. To use a rabbeting spacer block, place it under the front bar clamp with the 3/8 inch shoulder facing towards the jig and slightly below the top surface of the Omnijig. Lock it in position. Next, making sure that the bottom edge of your drawer is against your right-hand stop block, bring your material forward and flush with your spacer block. You notice that this brings the entire piece of material 3/8 of an inch farther forward, bringing this edge on your original cutting line. Lock this in position. When you cut your dovetails now, you'll cut the proper depth dovetail for your rabbeted drawer front. Again, we are only cutting the drawer front by itself. Move your spacer block and your drawer front to the opposite side of the Omnijig. Again, be sure to place the bottom edge of your drawer front against your stop block. There you have your completed rabbeted drawer front. If all the Omnijig did was cut half-inch, half-blind dovetails better than any other jig on the market, I'd buy it. But the Omnijig does far more than that. With the addition of a few accessory templates, guide bushings, and router bits, you can really add a professional touch to your projects that you'll be proud of. For example, I just demonstrated the half-inch, half-blind dovetail joint. A 1/4-inch half-blind dovetail joint can be cut using the 1/4-inch accessory template, a 1/4-inch dovetail bit, and a 5/16" guide bushing. Setup procedure for the 1/4-inch dovetail is the same as for the half-inch dovetail. Positioning of the template and the stops will differ. The dimensions are listed in your instruction manual. As I mentioned earlier, machine-cut dovetails were often distinguished by their set size and spacing, whereas hand-cut dovetails often varied in size and spacing. The Omnijig now gives the craftsman the ability to cut dovetails that have the appearance of being hand-cut. The first additional dovetail I would like to demonstrate is the half-inch, half-blind dovetail with 2-inch spacing. This is a beautiful joint for exposed joinery and was used in early contemporary furniture. Equipment needed to cut the half-inch hand dovetails with 2-inch spacing includes a router, 2 dovetail templates, the pin template and the tail template, the half-inch router bit, and the 5/8" guide bushing. These 2 items come with the basic Omnijig. While the half-inch dovetails with 2-inch spacing may be cut on any width of board from 2 1/4 inches to 16 inches, there are certain widths that are more ideal than others. These widths are determined by the formula 2 times the number of pins plus 1/8 of an inch. For my demonstration today, I'll be cutting dovetails with 2 pins. Therefore, the width of my board will be 2 times 2 plus 1/8 of an inch, or 4 1/8 inches. Remember I mentioned earlier that the half-inch hand dovetails are cut with 2 templates, a tail template, which I marked on the template, and a pin template. I will begin our demonstration with the tail template. Here you see the Omnijig and the tail board properly positioned for cutting our tails. The way this was achieved was by first placing the pin board under the front clamp, raising it approximately 1/4 of an inch above the surface of the Omnijig. Next, slide your tail board under the top clamp, butt it firmly against the pin board, and lock it into position. Next, I placed the finger template on top of the top board and locked it down into place, making sure that it was level all the way across the Omnijig. The next thing to do is to properly position the tail board in respect to the fingers on the template. To do this, the distance from the front edge of the tail board to the back of the finger template must be equal to the thickness of your pin board plus 1/8 of an inch. The tail board is then repositioned so that the distance from the outside edge of the board to the inside of this finger is equal to the outside edge of the board to the inside of this finger. Once the tail board is properly positioned, slide the stop block over and lock it in position. Next, remove the pin board. Remember that the tails and pins are routed separately. For this cut, there's no change in the setup of the router that we had for the half-inch, half-blind dovetail. Here you see the Omnijig set up for proper cutting of the pin board. First, a piece of scrap material at least 1 inch wider than the pin board and the same thickness as the tail board is placed under the top clamp. Then the pin template is placed on top of this piece of scrap material in the same position as your previous tail template. Next, your pin board is positioned under the front clamp with the inside of the drawer out and butted up against the underside of the template. The pin template is positioned so that the front edge evenly overlaps the pin board so that we can cut all the way through the pin board. Additionally, this dimension from here to here is equal to the dimension from here to here. With your pin board properly positioned, slide your stop over and lock it down. Remember that all cuts will be made on this side of the fixture. To ensure a tight fit of this joint, you must make a slight cut on the inside corners of your pins. Trim these corners off just slightly. This is done because your tails have a radius in the corners where your pins have squared edges. By trimming the inside corners of your pins, you've now created a radius, and this will ensure a perfect fit. So far, I have demonstrated half-blind dovetails, where the joinery can be seen from only one side of the drawer. The Omnijig can also cut through dovetails with variable spacing, where the joinery can be seen from both sides of the drawer. This type of joinery is very beautiful and is usually only seen in fine quality handcrafted furniture. The Omnijig can cut 3/4 inch dovetails in stock up to 13/16 inch thick, or half-inch dovetails in stock up to 1/2 inch thick. I will demonstrate cutting the 3/4 inch dovetails. The equipment needed to cut the adjustable through dovetails includes your router, the adjustable through dovetail template, the long and the thin spacers which come as a unit with the template, the 3/4 inch dovetail cutter, a 5/16 inch straight cutter, and a 5/8 inch guide bushing. The 5/8 inch guide bushing comes with your basic Omnijig. Points to remember when cutting the through dovetails include: all pieces to be cut, both pins and tails, will be held under the front bar clamp. All cuts will be made on one side of the Omnijig. The top clamp will always hold scrap backup material that is at least 1/4 inch thicker than the material to be dovetailed. Here you see I have a 1/4 inch spacer underneath my 3/4 inch material. This is required so that the cutter will not cut into the base of the Omnijig. The tail board is cut with a dovetail bit, and the pin board is cut with a straight bit. To set up the Omnijig to cut through dovetails, place the washers on the bracket rod in this order: the large spacer, 3 black washers, and a thin spacer. Additionally, adjust the rod nut so that it is within 1/16 of an inch of the base of the Omnijig. Do this on both sides. Next, to cut the tails, reposition the washers and place the Omnijig template in this position. Tighten it down.
Position the bracket in the same position on the other side and tighten it down. The tailboard is positioned under the front clamp. I have removed the left stop block and butted the tailboard against the left stop and flush against the underside of the template. The Omnijig through dovetail template differs from all the others in that the pins and tails can now be variably spaced. This gives you the ability to begin and end each dovetail cut with a half pin. Additionally, you can create your own pattern of pins and tails. For this demonstration, I'm going to use 4 of the template forks to cut my tails in this board. You'll notice that I have pre-marked my board 7/16 of an inch from the edge on both ends. This will guarantee a half pin beginning and ending in my dovetail cut. I reposition the outside forks so that this inside edge lines up with that 7/16 inch mark and tighten my set screw. I do the same thing on the opposite side of the board. Next, I can position the inner forks anywhere I want to create the pattern of pins and tails that I desire. Next, I reposition my backup board with the 1/4 inch spacer behind my tailboard, butt it firmly against the tailboard, and lock it in place. The router is prepared to cut our tailboard with a 5/8 inch guide bushing and a 3/4 inch dovetail bit. The depth of cut is adjusted for the thickness of the pin board plus 1/2 of an inch. Set the router on the Omnijig template and check to make sure that there is clearance between the cutter and the base of the Omnijig. Next, you will carefully guide the router in the template fork slots to cut the tails on the tailboard. Be careful not to cut in other areas. The Omnijig is now set up for cutting the pins. The template has been positioned so that only the thin washer is behind the bracket and all other spacers are in front of the bracket. The forks have not been repositioned. Additionally, we have positioned the pin board so that this distance from here to here is equal to this distance from here to here. The stop block has been replaced and slid over to butt against the pin board and locked in position. To cut the pin board, the router is set up with the same 5/8 inch bushing and a 5/16 inch straight cutter. Adjust the depth of cut to cut the pin boards to be equal to the thickness of the tailboard plus 1/2 inch. To cut the pins, this time we will guide the router on only the forward portion of the forks. All the waste material in between will be removed. Once again, set the router on the Omnijig to make sure that there is clearance between the cutter and the base of the Omnijig. After both the pins and tails are cut, check for fit. Perfect. If the joint is too loose, make your adjustments to cutting the pins by moving the template back using the rod nuts. If it's too tight, move the template forward, again using the rod nuts. As you notice, my pins project slightly above my tail piece. I like to cut my dovetails in this manner so that I can sand these flush and have a perfectly flush joint. The box joint, sometimes referred to as a finger joint, can also be cut on the Omnijig. This joint is generally used in box construction to provide plenty of glue surface on the interlocking fingers and give added strength to your boxes. It's also a very decorative joint and can be used in fine furniture construction. I use it regularly in my shop for small boxes and bins to hold materials in. Equipment needed to cut the half-inch box joints includes a router, the box joint template, a 1/2-inch straight cutter, and your 5/8-inch guide bushing. The guide bushing comes with your basic Omnijig. Here you see the Omnijig set up to cut the half-inch box joints. To cut the box joint, we use a technique similar to cutting the through dovetail. First, all cuts will be made on the front left-hand side of the fixture. And backup material, at least a 1/4 inch thicker than the material being routed, is placed under the top clamp and butted against our workpiece to help prevent tear out. And then position your box joint template on top of the scrap material, making sure that the front edge of the board to the back of the finger slot is approximately 3/8 of an inch. I've marked the workpiece at the center and positioned it under the template so that the center is 1/16 of an inch to the right of one of the fingers. Once the workpiece is properly positioned under the template, slide the left front stop bar over and lock it down. We are now ready to make our cuts. The router is set up to cut the box joint using the standard 5/8-inch guide bushing and a 1/2-inch straight cutter. Depth of cut is adjusted to be equal to the thickness of the material being cut plus 1/4 of an inch. Place your router on the template and check to make sure that there is clearance between the router bit and the base of the Omnijig. Both ends of all 4 pieces of the box are cut in exactly the same manner. There we have the finished joint. There is no adjustment for tightness of fit with the 1/2-inch box joint. So far I've demonstrated using the Omnijig to join boards at corners, but the Omnijig offers you another option, the tapered sliding dovetail. This joint is ideal for joining shelves to sides, such as in bookcases, stereo cabinets, and other types of furniture. Equipment needed to cut the tapered sliding dovetail includes the router, the dovetail template, 2 spacer washers, the 1/2-inch dovetail bit, and the guide bushing. The dovetail bit and the guide bushing come with the standard Omnijig. The template and the thin spacer washers come as a unit. Here you see the Omnijig set up to cut the tapered sliding dovetail. You will notice that this template differs considerably from all the others in that the router is guided in this direction instead of in and out of the fingers. The mail board is centered underneath the mail guide bar, and the router is guided on each side of the bar to cut a perfect mail dovetail tenon. The mail board is centered under the mail guide bar and butted against the left stop. To properly position the female board, line it up evenly with the male board and slide the top left stop over and lock it in position. The router is set up to cut the tapered sliding dovetail with the standard 5/8-inch bushing and the 1/2-inch dovetail bit. The depth of cut is set at 23/32 of an inch. The tightness of the joint can be adjusted by raising or lowering the bit. Once everything is properly positioned and the router set up, slide the female board back out of the way, placing the router in the male dovetail slot. Wait till the router comes to a complete stop before removing it from the template. Next, place the guide bushing on the opposite side of the male bar and make your second cut. Next, we are going to cut the female dovetail slot. Remove the male board. I've marked the center line of where the female groove will be. Additionally, a little trick I use is to mark over 12/32 of an inch from that line. This is half the width of the female slot in the template. Next, I will position the board so that that center line is directly in the middle of the female slot. I use the 12/32 mark that I put on my board to help me get the line perfectly centered in the female groove. Once the female board is properly positioned, lock it in place. We are now ready to make our cut. You must be certain to run the guide bushing down both sides of the female slot. The female dovetail slot is complete. Check for fit. Our final joint and a perfect fit. If the joint is too loose, lower the router bit and cut again. If it's too tight, raise your router bit. The Omnijig really is as fast, as easy, and as accurate to use as I've demonstrated to you. No matter whether yours is a home workshop, a small business, or a cabinet shop, the Omnijig will add a professional touch to your work that you will be proud of. Just think of the possibilities. From drawer construction to cabinets and bookshelves, cedar chests, or jewelry boxes, the Omnijig does it all. The Omnijig, from Porter Cable, tools for the professional.